Okay, so this is episode 3 of Clusterfunk, and today the title of this episode is "From Hello World to Helm Charts," and specifically, we're going to start a format here where we're looking at different topics from the perspective of product management and how the business side of technology, specifically Kubernetes and the ecosystem, and then the the engineering perspective as well, and try to uh, show where these different solutions have value. And specifically, in the next episodes to follow this one, we're going to be looking at individual CNCF projects as well as other things that we're doing to provide some context around these kind of ideas. So just to kind of kick us off, and this is for you too, Fab.
This is episode 3. We are getting aged. We're getting older.
We're getting older.
Yeah.
So so we've been working with Kubernetes together for how many years?
5.
5.
Probably.
That makes you feel older right there.
Yeah.
And we both worked.
And I was working on that earlier, and you too. So we are working together since 5, but it's a lot more time for Kubernetes.
Probably closer to 8. I mean, I was doing Docker more than Kubernetes in 2018, but yeah, it came on pretty quick.
I started in 2016.
Yeah.
So with GitOps on AWS, and it's a painful experience. And there were not Helm at that time. So today we are talking about something that the first time I heard about Helm, I said, okay, this will solve all the YAML format problem that I have, indentation and similar. Let's go for that. And it was not true. It is not solving that point. So it's not a god, this Helm, but it's very useful. We will see why.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's useful technically, which makes it useful from at some level from a business perspective of building things. As I kind of think about it, it doesn't seem like it's easy, especially on complicated or intricate platforms, but it does speed it up. I mean, nobody's going to go crazy enough to like build a whole project with and without Kubernetes to see how much it actually sped up things. But it clearly gives you opportunities to optimize the development process, like, having namespaces and multiple clusters and so forth to standardize things. But just the idea that everything's kind of standardized within this framework, whether you're talking about using an ecosystem solution like KubeVirt, or whether you're talking about just any project. I think
think about the Kubernetes. Kubernetes has given us the proof that it's a very good business enabler.
Yeah.
So whoever is searching for something that is a fast approach to create things is going to Kubernetes for that reason. You have the classic idea of speed to market. So you can deploy something, seeing that the product is already there, and you are dealing with manifests, YAML files. There is no organization in all of that, but you are still able to scale all your processes across environments, CD stages. That is another point that we have to talk about. So I think that point is the key to start talking about why we moved from a Kubernetes that is purely declarative with manifests and YAML files to something that is organized in bundles that are Helm charts.
Right. And it keeps everything kind of structured from the perspective of it. At least, people know how to use it. right, on our teams, so they have an expectation of how it's going to work, and they can build their applications with the idea that they're going to, be on a Kubernetes cluster, and they develop inside a Kubernetes cluster. So, from that perspective, it gives us as a business some continuity and uh, common set of things for people to learn from onboarding. I think all of those things get to like faster, getting
And
there.
think about what we were doing in the past when it was time for go for a release process. We were doing some kind of monthly blood sacrifice because we had to obtain some kind of results for this release manifest.
Yeah,
Now we can do that 20 times a day with deployments, canary deployments that are based on this ability of being declarative, and we don't do blood sacrifice anymore. So that's a great point.
that's good. Right. It's hard to like recruit people after you've sacrificed a few. So,
Yeah.
I think you know, the other side from a business enabler is, at least if you're running a platform like we have in the past, the idea that you're going to scale for such a thing um, is really kind of the overall promise, I think, to the business, that scalability is built into this concept of Kubernetes, that you're going to be able to not forget about it, but you're going to build it in a certain part of the solution, and then it's going to take over in operations and production, and deliver something that's really high value.
If I think about people that are coming from a non Kubernetes approach, they don't have that strategic way of thinking about infrastructure, in example. And this is Helm is also about infrastructure, not just about deploying the microservice that way or the components. It's also to create something that is strategically available to reduce that bottleneck that was present in AWS when you had to create a lot of cloud formation, on in Azure when you were using ARM templates, a lot of cloud things that you were doing for creating infrastructure. If you just create that for Kubernetes cluster and you leave the infrastructure of your services inside the Kubernetes reality, there will be no guy saying, no, we cannot do that, like the devil's guys of the first time. You will have people that are by CI/CD and GitOps able to create that also as developers. And this is a strategic main point for whoever is trying to think about, should I adopt Kubernetes or not? Should be the learning curve a lot. It's not, because you have developers that will learn how to deploy their own instances, their own resources, using the knowledge of YAML, a declarative way of expressing resources by markup language. So the learning curve is really slow for them. It's longer and higher in terms of complexity for the people that are managing the infrastructure, but it's always that way. So the GitOps integration is another main point that we can consider in the consistency that you can achieve across cloud, on-prem, and whatever environment you are running on for your organization. I don't know, Ed, if you feel that when you hear about Helm, you generally have been involved in Helm charts packaging for microservices since the beginning of many projects we have been working on. Did you feel that the Helm ability was really completing that from your point, from your perspective?
Oh, completing it from what perspective, you mean? I'm not sure I'm following. So I mean, I think Helm, for me, Helm, along with a lot of the other parts of what is Kubernetes, it enables us to take something which is the main expense of the company, which, outside of people, right, and development, which is the infrastructure, and basically create an opportunity for it to be an asset where you can count on it being accessible, right, to the developers in such a way that they don't have to go like request some kind of particular action. At least they shouldn't have um, to get access to the infrastructure and to grow something, right? It's, I mean, there's still a lot of work for the infrastructure guys to do, but it seems like the conversations with DevOps outside of like what maybe some troubleshooting here and there during development is is really super simplified. And I would lay that at the feet of Helm for kind of driving a lot of that simplification, or at least, the ability to treat infrastructure as kind of a general resource instead of like getting real specific about how to tune like a virtual machine or something like that.
Absolutely. And if you add to all of these things the ability that you can have observing what is happening. So, pairing what is today called observability, when I was younger, it was called log files, then it moved to monitoring, and now it's observability. But that step one by one is because we added more abilities to observe what is happening on top of a cluster. And if you move that focus from the infrastructure to the applications, now we have tracing, the ability of getting metrics from the applications, having logs. All of these scenarios are really auditable, and we can use it with Helm, in example, looking at the messages that the infrastructure and Kubernetes is producing for us. It's similar to Sherlock Holmes when you have someone that is searching with a lens everything and giving you the results. You have to filter out the information, but with observability at your hands, you can really take everything and look at what is happening on top of your cluster, infrastructure wide, applications wide, depending on what you did with the Helm charts and strategies. Helm is one strategy, but we also have customized. So many people are taking both of the opportunities, and Helm is the base for running CI CDs like Flux systems or operations in Argo, because generally we always deploy Helm releases. Also, if we are using additional tools, and here we are reconnecting to the observability of these tools that we are using, what are the messages that we can really know? If something went wrong on an environment variable, we will just have to read log files. So the time that we are saving as a project management company or whatever usage that we do of Kubernetes is also visibility from this declarative approach. And I think it's very important to focus on the time you spend on troubleshooting versus the time that you spend on deploying. Deploying is quite easy. So the usage of a Helm install, straightforward. But
Yeah.
what is happening later?
Yeah, I think if you look at like our business, we've got, we've improved over time. We've got a relatively broad platform. I think if we hadn't had, used Kubernetes both on the edge and in the cloud, we would have had, and then, like kind of multiple cluster kind of, or at least multiple namespace, multi-tenant kind of a provisioning. If we wouldn't have done that, it would have increased the complexity of the overall project not to have had those kind of things. So I think those kind of capabilities are hugely efficient, right? Especially, uh, you know, from my perspective, I don't know if it really makes sense for, a lot of companies to share their architecture like so much. But for us, I mean, I think it's really a value proposition for us to be able to use what we've done before, um, again, as, as a framework to get to the platform of Kubernetes, right? So I think it's a critical resource, when you think about enabling a business. And I think for a platform company, I don't know how you would do it really without Kubernetes. I mean, I guess we did it before Kubernetes somehow, but um, a platform is a complex environment, right? I mean, there's a lot of structure to it, and there's a lot of hierarchy to it that represents how the clients are going to work with the platform, right?
Absolutely. You think about that when you are having a non-platform company, you are just thinking about a product to create and sell. While if you have a platform company, you think about productizing something that you have on the platform. So you are not creating a single product, but an offer.
Yeah,
And for this, I was thinking about internal developer portals. That is a topic maybe for a next session, but we have been talking a lot about that. That is basically providing a self-service bundle of things that you can use on top of your platform and that will do the activities easier for everyone, for developers, for administrators, for program and project managers. Also, if the base is the platform that is productizing something. Platform as a service, like a load balancer, if it's not used or it's used under the cover, it's not really a product. It's something that is a
yeah,
bundle. But after you have many products, you can create a solution. And this is also the other part related to platform and IDPs.
yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a a big opportunity for a lot of companies that are thinking about how they're going to do their next product, or executives, or teams, right? For what they're going to do. I think the productivity that we've seen before, and the velocity go up without sacrificing a lot of governance issues and other things as well. So it becomes a real foundation, like an internal developer portal. Um, it becomes that kind of thing where um, we can build solutions that enable our developers to start to move faster with, and start to create more structure. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. It's a little off subject, but it aligns. Is that if you, I was reading this paper by some guys from Google who were saying that not that microservices should die, but that in general, the microservice applications that a lot of people have written are kind of over engineering for most companies. Like, you don't really need that kind of complexity until you get to a certain size platform or a certain size application that's really gigantic. And they were pushing for people to be more focused on uh, modular monolithic, like for most companies, that they were pushing that. And I think that that kind of lines up, not that Kubernetes doesn't support microservices, but it just kind of lines up with the general concept behind Kubernetes, is that it can take you a long way, right? And of course, if you get to be, you have a platform the size of like Datadog or someone like that, who's got just thousands of, or hundreds of clusters anyway, and thousands of tenants, right? Uh, You know, when you get to that scale, okay, yeah, maybe you need to re-engineer everything again for, higher performance. But for a lot of companies, I think that this is the right amount of structure. It's maybe the minimal amount at some level that 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 a company should focus on. And then, as you were saying before about GitOps, I think that, GitOps is, I don't know if you would describe it as a core Kubernetes capability. It's enabled through different projects that you can add on to your Kubernetes deployment. But
Yeah, you can use GitOps wherever.
yeah,
So Kubernetes is a benefit for GitOps, But what you were saying about developers, just to recall that in the title we have from Hello World to Helm. And Hello World, who is using Hello World testing? The developers especially. So what you are focusing on is that on GitOps, that generally is associated to DevOps.
Yeah.
It's not just DevOps. It can be also developers. So our focus is moving to developers to give immediately the power to do something. We still have the DevOps abilities to create this infrastructure. But the real value here is that if you are a platform user and not a platform maintainer, you just want to run your thing.
Right.
And your thing is developed. Monolithic migration you were mentioning, it's really easy if you put the monolith there and you take a piece of the monolith and you extract it to a microservice, and the developer will be able to see that process by observing it and whatever. So it's very, very valuable.
And yeah, I think that the ability to like integrate your Git processing, your release processing all together with Kubernetes and Helm, right, brings us back to kind of the beginning again, as far as how all this kind of comes together and actually is speedier to operate. Like, for us, I think the ability to move from one one phase to another in the life cycle of a release has gotten faster and faster as we've gotten more experienced with Kubernetes. And I think, a lot of this, I would say a lot of this comes down to, how you're going to approach Kubernetes, right? Like if you're going to be a platform provider, you really got to reduce your costs overall to a point where you can't really afford a managed service, even if it's available, right? So you've got to be able to go open source, and Kubernetes supports you there. So you, as a business enabler, right? The work that Rancher and SUSE have done, for example, is just a flavor of open source Kubernetes. I think is it's going to be, or it has been, like the differentiator for a lot of platform companies that have been coming up, because they were able to go down that road and basically scale without having a managed service of some sort from one of the cloud providers holding them back. Which I think the difference is, are you an IT project for an enterprise, or are you a platform trying to provide services to a lot of people? And that's where I think, for me, Kubernetes comes in, and especially the open source flavors. I don't know how you could, or let's put it this way, you'd have a more expensive business model and you'd be less in control of it if you couldn't get to an open source version of Kubernetes rather than.
Yeah, that's a common vision. But you were talking about not sacrificing governance earlier. So I'm thinking that if you adopt GitOps or an organized ways for using repositories, then you will have a sort of governance framework, because every source of truth, everything that is related to the project is on Git. If you think about releasing, the main branch of the master branch, both are valid concepts if we think about release, where's the source of truth for your application. But if you think about the infrastructure and Kubernetes, and you just think about GitOps and the main branch, that is something where developers, platform users, and whoever in the governance of your ecosystem, of your environment, will rely on to create something. So you are basically building a trust model, something that is where the truth is. And think about QA working on the same thing, and program management and project management working on the same thing. So having a common placeholder, not really necessarily understanding GitOps and commands for Git, clone, and similar activities, but just having a common reference. So you just have to build some kind of tool. And regarding costs, that's why in the last 2 years we are having a lot of products, open source based products that are like open costs, cube costs, because people are very sensitive to optimize these kind of segments for each of the contexts they are working on by cost adoption. So it's a real cost adoption. Generally, it's cost consideration of the amount of spending money on top of resources. I would say is cost adoption because you adopt a way to optimize the cost of your platform, of your resources. And if you are a customer of a platform or a platform user, you will understand the costs because they are schematically contained in a box for you. And that is possible only because of these segments that we can create by Kubernetes, by GitOps, by internal developer portals, and by, why not, considering the main topic that was Helm charts, segments, small boxes that we can use not just as containers, but as unit for identifying our business. So a business unit is an example of Helm chart. How much time do I need to create the resources inside that Helm chart? How they will cost to my company? And if I'm not a platform builder or maintainer, I'm just a platform user, how will be that box being for my business effective or not in terms of cost, efficiency, team usage, integrations, and trust model with GitOps? You think that it's a lot of benefits that you can have from just Kubernetes and Helm if you pair the right resources.
Yeah, I think being able to standardize development across all these different groups that we have without copy and pasting, using Helm to actually make these things happen is what you need to be able to prove as you grow up as a platform. I mean, I think you have to have that minimum capability to basically show that you're mature enough to not just throw stuff out there, that you're going to have structure behind Helm charts, and Helm charts are going to give you that standardization as a business where people can expect that your service isn't going to change, because I think that's, to me, the most complicated part of these kind of activities. I mean, if you're building something for your company that's just a internal solution, there's one level of complexity there. It may be very complex, and there might be a lot of customers to serve, but the minute you start to talk about being a platform, now there's all sorts of expectation setting, which is what you were talking about. And when you get to that point, I think that your ability to be consistent, and support functions, when somebody signs up for your service in year one and they're with you in year five, right? I think the idea that you've improved things along the way, but they've been able to hold on to the value that they originally got from you, right? That's
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
It's not totally a Kubernetes delivered result, but it is, a lot of it is Kubernetes, right? A lot of it, of how it works and how Helm charts work and what the ability is there, can be experienced through by longtime users from that process. And that's really kind of it. If you're like 3 years in and you don't have that, you're just like busily like trying to keep it alive, right, the whole time. I think when you get to the end, it's kind of too late if you haven't really got that standardization in place with something like
You
Kubernetes.
have to start from scratch.
Yeah,
There is no turning point. Yeah, you're right.
and I think that's what a lot, you see some companies do. They have these major like version twos, which is essentially a complete rewrite. And it's probably part of the reason, right? They may have cut a corner or two or something just to get it out the door. Um, well, I mean, just the original prototypes I did on my last project, which were 8 years ago. I mean, it wasn't even Kubernetes at that
But
point.
that's because we are still using that prototype as a model, so
Yeah,
it's not crash. It was before of ChatGPT era. Now,
yeah,
generally, the AI with the AI, what you will do is that you will create a solution with the AI. Then it will not work, and you will refactor on top the previous solution with AI. So nothing changed really. It's using the right Swiss Army knife with three commands that is Helm is install, uninstall, or template. These are the most used commands that you have to learn as a developer when you use a Helm chart. Another point of view is for the DevOps guys that needs to create the Helm charts with the Jinja template and Go template and the other parts that are related to how you organize the syntax for charts like the Helm charts for the Go template in this case. And you need to know more about that. You need to know more about the syntax, but not that more and that much about Kubernetes. So it's still an advantage. You will just run the install, uninstall, and template to test your results and the environment variables, and it will be really your Swiss Army knife with three comments. And it's like writing a sort of wish list to Kubernetes. It's like writing the letter to Santa, sending it to there, and then Kubernetes is doing the work for you, but the letter was delivered by Helm. So it's a very, very good point for developers to learn about how to optimize their written code, their resources, their containerized applications, because it's still a point on containerization, and throw them to Kubernetes, not knowing what it is doing, just having an endpoint to deploy all of that. And it's similar to when you go to buy furniture to the IKEA. I don't know if in the US you have that. You have the microservices that are like the instructions based microservice, but you need to assemble them somehow. Helm is doing that for you. So with all of these things, developers are solving the problems by themselves. You don't need other people to create a prototype like the one that you were mentioning. And when you were creating the prototype without AI, it was just you and the machine and Node-RED or whatever you were using. Now that we have the AI, it is still us with that. The idea is coming out from our brain.
yeah.
Helm is still something that we need to use to deploy that. So whatever you are doing as a prototype, you will need to rely on Helm. Eventually, the charts created by AI and the Go syntax, Go template syntax, easier to manage, but it's still that activity. Nothing is changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of alignment and strategy between, I think, Kubernetes and Helm charts and AI and the rules that you create inside of AI that you declare, right, of how you want things done. So, I mean, it's not really that foreign, of a concept. I think Kubernetes is going to live on a long time uh, with AI, where I think languages will be de-emphasized, right? Because the code generation is just not going to, like, I've talked to people who have generated code for front ends, for example, and the AIs have pulled down like React almost immediately, anticipating that's what you want. But really, I've heard of people saying, no, 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 don't use React because the developer isn't going to go back into it. And he said, just write it in HTML and JavaScript. and leave it at that. So from that perspective, you end up with a different kind of thinking, right? Is where Kubernetes is probably going to remain, right? Even if something that's AI generated, to your point with Helm charts that have been generated by AI, probably
Yeah, absolutely.
languages will go
Tremendous.
importance.
But one other thing that I was thinking about, we were talking about GitOps, and now the purist people will say GitOps is for devs. Well, it's not, because generally who is using operations is also for developers. You were saying, don't use React, use React. We don't care about that. With Helm, we are React agnostic. You can use whatever you want is packaged.
Right.
But you need to know the GitOps model. So where is the truth for what I'm doing? Am I a developer? Yes, in this case. I'm not, but for this case, I will put my mask on. And when I commit to a repo, my changes, what is happening? Operations on top of the cluster. I wonder many times when I show to developers how Argo CD or Flux are working, they are saying, oh, I see that you run a command. What is it supposed to produce? And then they go to the cluster and they see the deployment done. Oh, that was my application. It's running there in the cluster on the cloud just with one commit. They are using operations. So developers are moving to something that is more DevOps, operations. And DevOps has in the name the dev prefix. So it's not just about using the right names, it's using the right strategies. Helm is giving us that option. It's not the problem solver because you build it, you ship it, but at the end, you will use PagerDuty for being on call because you will still have the problems that we have all the days in production. In my jacket, I always wear the PagerDuty pin with all my certifications. Yeah, because it's inevitable. But it's a big help because you will just run an upgrade of the template of the Helm charts. And probably it could solve the problem with the newer version without having to orchestrate everything. If you have a good observability system running on top of your application,
Yeah.
you will also be able to do that magic canary deployment that we're rolling out different Helm releases will give you the opportunity to fix all the problem also when you are on call on PagerDuty.
Well, with that, I think we can put this one in the can, so to speak, as episode 3. And as we get into the next episodes, I think our attempt over the last 3 episodes has been to lay a foundation of why Kubernetes, how we're using it, how it's used, and answer those kind of questions. And now we can get into the next part, which is really more about what's going on. I think it's a community-led platform. So what's going on in the community, and what do people need to know, whether you're talking about a platform or not? What do they need to know about the different projects in the CNCF ecosystem and how they relate, right? So I think that's going to be an exciting next chapter here of what we're going to do.
For a today takeaway, Ed, I would say that developers, please do not consider yourself as developers anymore, but as product engineers. Because without you, developers, it's not possible to have product engineering. You are not just a peon or a worker on top of some kind of weird magic table. You are acting as someone that's starting from writing hello world up to deploying it by Helm charts.
Mm-hmm.
You are really a key point. So developers, take it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
You can bother zero about being junior, mid, senior developer. We don't care about that. You are just developer. But with the right tools at your hands, you will become a product engineer. Ed, what do you think about that?
That
Is
sounds
it
good.
too much for a developer?
No, I'm ready to start over again. All you got to do is put me in a time machine, and I'll take those words back to.
So you're going back to developer.
Yeah.
Don't.
No.
Don't.
All right. Well,
We
thank
will
you.
never be able to do that because we are system engineers
That's
from
right.
the past.
From the past.
Great.